Well, hello, folks. Welcome to our Growing Succulents Successfully in the Bay Area with our instructor, Janice Moody. Hopefully there's some of you on. Oh, let me open this up so I can tell how many folks are here. Let's see. I am sharing. Janice, can you can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. All righty. Well, I'm sure people are still joining, but I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introduction. My name is Debbie Ivazis, and I work for the city of Redwood City and the Water Conservation Program. And oh, I forgot to blur my screen so everybody can see my very messy office. And we welcome you to our presentation tonight. Pretty exciting. Get to learn all about succulents. Anyways, I'll go ahead and get started with our slides. So all attendees are in mute by default. An instructor will pause periodically for questions. Audience questions are encouraged, and there's two ways to ask. You can raise your hand. So just the little raised hand on the bottom here, or and then I'll unmute you, or you can do the question and answer moderator and I'll read the question to the instructor. So that's how you would do that over here. And the webinar is being recorded and it will be made available probably in a few days. So BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, a water company, and a university that purchase wholesale from San Francisco Regional Water System. The BOSCA member agencies provide water to 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. BOSCA's goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. So for many years, the water agencies have been doing a lot of indoor water conservation programs, but we realized that majority of the water goes outdoors. So our objective with this program is save water in outdoor landscapes. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that the future water supply needs of our communities are met. So we have ways to help you do that. One is our Lawn Be Gone program. City of Redwood City participates in that. We rebate $2 per square foot for every $2, of course, per square foot that you take out and replace with efficient landscape. And then we have a rebate program for rain barrels as well. This is in collaboration with San Mateo County's water pollution prevention program. So if Redwood City also participates in this, so if you're not, if your agency doesn't, you can still get $50 back for the rain barrel. Generally, $100 covers the cost. And then we have a smart controller program. The ratio is great. You know, you just can set it right from your smartphone. And Redwood City participates in that program as well. And then with the Lawn Be Gone, you can also do an optional rain garden rebate. And if those of you that may be in the Valley Water District, they offer support for sustainable landscapes. Looks like they give $2, $1 to $2 a square foot for replacing turf. Other information, South Bay Green Gardens, and there's videos. And then you can get more information by emailing. All right, a little more information about Valley Water. Upcoming classes. This is our last one in our series for the spring, but there's many more that you can attend that are hosted by other agencies. water-wise irrigation practices. It's April 16th, and you can see the list goes on. You can also see videos of previously recorded classes. And then we have our waterways gardening in the Bay Area that's available on the Bosca website as well. And with that, I'll stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to Janice Moody. I'll go ahead and give you a little information about her. Janice's horticultural roots run deep. She grew up on a nursery that her family started in Half Moon Bay in the early 60s. Although she majored in dietetics, I think, Janice, if you mute, maybe I'm getting feedback, so I'm guessing it's maybe from you. I'm not sure. She majored in dietetics, excuse me, at UC Davis. Her inner passion for gardening never waned. And after wearing many hats over the years, she finally found her true calling in life when she became a UC Master Gardener in 2010 and eventually started Seascapes Succulent Nursery and Garden Design in 2016, located in Half Moon Bay. She calls herself a jack of all trades, but a master of only one, gardening. She feels so fortunate to be able to work outdoors, doing what she loves most and sharing her gardening knowledge with others. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Janice.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks to Bosca for sponsoring this event this evening. I hope we can impart a lot of knowledge in this short hour and a half. And you come away with a broader spectrum of how you can create a water-wise landscape in your own garden. Well, let's get going. First of all, I'd like to tell you who Master Gardeners are. We are volunteers trained, excuse me, trained and certified by the University of California to provide community service and educational outreach that helps home gardeners and community organizations garden sustainably and create a healthy environment. And there's 2 links for you to reach out to us. If you're in Santa Clara County, you can go to the Santa Clara County Master Gardener site. And if you're in San Mateo and San Francisco County, you can reach us at this other link down below. And you can receive a PDF of this presentation if you so desire, although I think they're going to, they're recording this webinar, so you'll be able to view it later on the Bosca site, I believe. So my learning goals today are to introduce you to succulents, what they are, their definition, their growth factors, what you need to grow a plant. And then after that, we're going to have a little question and answer short period. So save your questions until these little breaks in my presentation. Then we'll discuss landscape design and I have another Q&A, and then care and maintenance tips and another Q&A. And if there's time, I do have a succulent propagation video that I can share with you, or you can YouTube it and find it there. It's also a link on my website as well. So let's get going some more. And I won't be covering container gardening per se, although I might allude to it here and there. I'm not going to cover house plants. These are all outdoor plants. And I'm not going to cover succulent art projects or cactus because in the coast side anyway, we don't grow a lot of cactus. You need a little bit warmer weather for them to grow faster and more prolifically. You over there in Redwood City, though, you could grow them in Santa Clara County. You can grow them much faster than we can over here. Okay, so what is a succulent? It is a drought-resistant plant that stores water in its leaves, stems, or roots. For an example, here's a cactus. Let me change this to a laser pointer so that you can see this. Here's a cactus, and that's storing all the water in the stems. And here's a spiral aloe. Isn't that a cool plant? And that is storing its water in the leaves. I'll be talking more about the spiral aloe because I do offer them, and I have one in my demonstration garden as well. Leaves and stems. So examples of plants that store their water in their leaves and stems are echeverias, this one in particular, and these down here. And then these aeoniums. They also store water in their leaves and stems. Now, there are some that store water in their leaves, stems, and roots, and those would be agaves and aloes. They have a juicier root system than the most of the other succulents. And therefore, I think that's what makes agaves more xeriscape. You know, they're kind of a desert plant like cactus, so you don't need much water at all to keep them alive, whereas aloes need a little bit more. There's also storage in the roots. I don't have a picture of it, but there's a big elephant foot palm that has a huge root system that's halfway above the ground. But that's more of a house plant. People tend to put that in their houses than in their yards because they can get outrageously huge. All right, now there's people come to me all the time and they go, well, I think I want to plant succulents because I want to save water. And I go, well, yeah, that's great that you want to do that. And I'll be glad to sell you a lot of plants if you want, but you can also grow other drought tolerant plants in your landscape. And they're drought tolerant for different reasons. The Aeonium on the left here is drought tolerant because it holds water in its stems and leaves. This drought tolerant perennial is Phormium or New Zealand flax on the right. It seeks out deep water with its root system. It has a very aggressive root system. So that's where it taps into the water, is with those roots going deep. Whereas these roots stay pretty shallow and they're hardly visible. So those are the basic differences. And they both require once or twice a month watering in the landscape. In pots, it's very different because this one would survive a lot longer in a pot, given that most of its water storage is above ground or above the pot, whereas this one has to be watered constantly because the roots take over the pot very quickly and it becomes root bound. Okay, so the succulents in the landscape, let me get rid of this little thing. Okay, the pros and cons of using succulents in the landscape. Well, the pros, of course, are very drought resistant, only needing water once or twice a month here in Half Moon Bay. Maybe if you're in a warmer climate over in Santa Clara, you might need to do it once a week, perhaps, but probably no more than that. You can offer year-round color and interest with succulents. You don't have to wait for them to flower for them to be colorful. For instance, this Echeveria Afterglow down here is colorful year-round and doesn't need to flower to be to be an eye popper in the garden. They're relatively gopher and deer resistant with some exceptions. And I'll show you an exception later in the presentation, but most of their roots are hardly visible, as in the Aeonium roots. So the gophers don't really care for them. They're not juicy enough for them. If they do nibble on them, the plant survives just fine. It regrows the roots pretty quickly. Agaves, on the other hand, and aloes have thicker roots. They may attack an agave, and if they get to the core of the agave and go up the middle of the agave, they can take a whole plant out, just one gopher. I'll show you a photo of that later. They're usually very easy to transplant because of their shallow root systems. They're easy to propagate from their stems and leaves, which I'll show you at the end of the presentation if there's time. They're easier to maintain than other drought-tolerant plants, in my opinion. They take less maintenance in the garden. And the cons are that most are sensitive to freezing and temperatures or hail damage. Now, this year on the coast, we were very lucky. I don't think we had one single frost, whereas last year we had 3 nights of frost. And so I had some plants that suffered. Not everyone, succumbs to 32 degrees. And that's the lowest we usually get is 32 degrees. And most of them do fine at 32 degrees for one night. If it was consecutive nights in a row, then we'd see more damage. And there are some that are more susceptible to it than others. Many are sensitive to extreme heat. Some people think that succulents are desert plants, but most of them are not. Cactus and agaves are examples of desert plants, but most of the other succulents are not grown in the desert, so they are sensitive to extreme heat. They're fragile, they break easily, so you can't walk among them very easily without breaking them, so you have to have shallow beds so you can reach everything easily. They're dangerous if they're spiky. So some are so spiky they can pop a basketball. So you don't want those necessarily around kids or pets. And they can rot if too moist for too long a period of time. That was my issue this year in my nursery. We had so many inundations of rain, as you know, that things didn't dry out for a long time. Luckily, most of my plants were fine in pots, and even in the landscape, I only lost a couple, and I'll explain why in the next slides. Okay, and my pointer is no longer working. Why is that? Let me try enter. No. Why did my screen freeze on me? Okay. It was working just fine, and now it's frozen. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can get it. Jeez Louise. Maybe okay, maybe down here there's an advanced slide option. No, it's not working either. I'm sorry.
So that's
Yep, there we go. It must have been a glitch in the internet. That's probably what it was. It was probably an internet glitch. Sorry about that. All right, growth factors. What do you need for a plant to grow? You have to have the right climate. I'll explain that. The sweet zone is 60 to 80, somewhere in between there, although they can grow below that and many can grow above that, but the sweet zone is 60 to 80 degrees. You need the right amount of sun for the plant. You do need water. A lot of people come to me and say, oh, you don't have to water these, do you? I said, no, most of these need some water or they will shrivel up and die on you. They need air, so they don't want to be saturated with water at their root level for too long, or they will not have air. They need to breathe. The microbes in the soil need to breathe. Plant needs air in order to photosynthesize. So you do have to have aeration in the soil, a porous enough soil so it aerates and drains well, and nutrients. So those are the factors needed for growing plants. And some people are in the misconception that they come to my nursery and they say, and they look at all my plants and they say, can all of these be grown outside? And I go, yes, they can, because they're all outside right now and they're here all year long. Yes, they can. They need sun to grow. So the process of photosynthesis, you need the light to come in, and the carbon dioxide and the light creates carbohydrates in plant leaf growth. And you also need water to be absorbed from the roots. And then the plant gives off oxygen in exchange for the carbon dioxide. So that's the whole photosynthesis thing in a nutshell. As I said, most succulents prefer temperatures about 60 to 80, although many can grow below that and some can grow above that. Very few grow in desert or freezing conditions. This is an agave attenuata on the left here that was succumbed to frost damage, and it just started limping. It may not limp like that the first day, but the second day is apparent that it got frostbitten because it will just droop and then the leaves turn black. Now this on the right is an agave attenuata, and this shows up the day after usually a hailstorm, and then you see all the little pitting that goes on in the leaves. These do eventually recover with growth because the new growth comes from the center and these leaves eventually die off below it. So it's not, you shouldn't just give up hope on those. Most importantly, you want to try to mimic the natural environment of where the plant originates from, if you can. Here's an example of spiral aloes. They're grown naturally on the hillsides in South Africa, up high in altitude. So they do occasionally get snowed on, and they survive the cold temperatures. So they've adapted to those the cold temperatures, but they rarely get really hot up in these mountains. So that tells you that if you live in San Jose, you might have a little more problem growing these than if you live on the coast or San Mateo or the rest of the peninsula. This Dudleya is a native California that grows along coastal bluffs, and it grows in crevices, rock crevices and slopes. And so that tells you one thing about this plant, that it needs good drainage. And the only time I have problems with Dudleya's rotting in my pots or landscape is when they don't drain well. So a lot of times I'll go out there and I'll turn some of the Dudleyas on their side so they don't collect water in their leaves, and that mimics like a hillside environment. And here's some agaves growing naturally in the desert of Sedona, Arizona. in this very nutrient poor soil. I can tell just from the color of it. It's not very nutrient rich, but they manage to survive regardless. All right, summer growers. Now, some grow in the winter and some grow in the summer months when it's warmer. And if you just memorize which one are summer growers, which are fewer than the winter growers, then you can just, by process of elimination, know which ones do better in the cooler climates. So these agaves, like this agave, not afterglow, but blue glow right here, that's definitely a summer grower, along with other agaves, such as these agaves on the side of it, attenuata, and another agave over here that I can't remember the name of right now. And here's an Echeveria afterglow in the middle. And this is a pink ice plant, or Oscularia deltoides. And there's a Euphorbia sticks on fire here. So these love the warm weather. And sometimes I struggle getting them through winter here because I don't have a covering over my nursery. It's open to the air. And so I have to be very selective about which Echeverias I keep during the winter and which ones I can't keep. And usually the thicker leafed Echeverias don't do as well as the thinner leafed ones, and sometimes vice versa. It's hard to tell sometimes. It's a kind of a process of elimination, experimentation, I should say. So if you realize that these like the summer months and they grow more in the warmer months, then everything else that you see, like at my nursery, for instance, would be winter or cooler climate growing. And I'll show you that slide next. So all of these down here prefer the cooler temperatures. And that's why aeoniums love it here in Half Moon Bay. These two on the outer sides here, sunburst aeonium and the Swartkop and the rock purslane, all of these, they seem to love it here on the coast. And here's some Dudleas here that I mentioned before, the California natives on each side of this aloe. And we're going to go through these individually as well. Frost and hail protection. So what do you do if you anticipate a frost coming up and you've got a very tender leafed plant? Now this agave attenuata right here in the middle is is like the canary in the cave, in the coal mine, they used to say. It's the first one to tell you that there's been frost because the leaves will droop on the outside edges. And so this one, of all the ones that I know of, this one is probably the most frost sensitive. This agave attenuata, very thin leafed agave. So what I do if I anticipate frost or hail, I'll go out and I'll put some lightweight row cover over it. You can also throw a sheet over it, whatever you want, as long as it doesn't blow away on you, weight it down with rocks. And this also prevents the pitting of the hail. This is a Calandrinia spectabilis, or rock purslane, and it got pitted with hail, but this one unfortunately grows so fast it outgrows that damage really quickly, whereas the attenuata is a little bit slower growing, so it takes a while to recover from that damage. The most cold hardy succulents are not necessarily the ones I always plant because they're not necessarily something that you see from a distance. Like this sempervivum right here is kind of pretty if you put it in a pot when you can see it up close. But if you put it in the landscape, it disappears with the color of the soil around it and you don't really see it. And they're very small, they're not very large. So I rarely use sempervivums, although they're really a tough plant. They even survive under the snow in Colorado and other places under the snow. So it's a very tough plant if you want something that's pretty foolproof. And this Delosperma cooperi is also pretty hardy, although I rarely use it. I use other ice plants. And the stone crop sedum, I do use this a lot. It's a sedum rupestre lemon ball because of its bright yellow color. I like it quite a bit. Pops in the landscape. Here's some other cold hardy ones. The Oscularia deltoides, that pink ice plant I mentioned before. It can handle heat and it can handle cold. So it's a pretty tough plant. Although occasionally one will just die for no reason, and I don't know why, but it will do that after it's gotten really big sometimes. But it's very beautiful. When it blooms, it's covered with light pink flowers. It's really pretty. I'll show you some photos of it in the landscape later. And these very tough, stiff-leafed agaves right here, they can hold up to a lot, I think minus 20 degrees, I think. they can handle because of their stiff leaf nature. This quadricolor, probably not so much because of the yellow variegation in it. It also tends to be the first one to rot. So that's my canary in the cage for rotting, is when I see an agave quadricolor right here rotting away, then I know that others may soon be rotting, because that's the first one to show signs of it. And these other ones, Sedum confusum, I use it quite a bit as a ground cover, and this golden carpet, I don't tend to use it because it tends to die back a little bit in the winter. But they withstand a winter. Even if they die back, they'll come back again. So that's what makes them hardy in the landscape. And I don't plant cactus, but I just included this because of the fuzzy nature of the cactus. It's more resistant to cold. Here's that spiral aloe that I keep mentioning because it's such a cool plant. This is the one I have in my demonstration garden behind my building. And actually it is divided into two right now. So now I have a spiral on the left side and I have a spiral on the right, which is called diffusion, I believe. It's a rare anomaly in the landscape, but it does happen every so often. So come by and see my rare anomaly sometime. Take a look. And this gentleman in England gave me permission to show this one. His spiral got covered in snow and it survived just fine, as long as it doesn't stay covered with snow forever. It's very cold tolerant, but these are not very heat tolerant. Anything over 85 degrees and they're not happy for a long period of time, or a week or two, let's say. And there's a lot of frost tender succulents that come from South Africa in particular, many crassulas, euphorbias that sticks on fire right here. It always looks like this after a winter. It just looks terrible. And so I have to kind of protect it and put it under cover, keep it warm and keep it protected. Otherwise it just looks crappy by the end of the winter. And I do not have good luck with these kalanchoes here, this Lucian flapjack. It never really looks good after a winter. So I rarely plant that in the landscape. The red fairy crassula does fine as long as there's no frost, and it just grows like a weed. So if you want a filler for a shady spot, red fairy crassula is your plant. It'll fill up a space immediately, as long as you don't have frost. And so there's one exception to the kalanchoes, which I'll show you in a little bit. Other Bay Area frost tender succulents are aeoniums. So the first one is the agave tenuata. I told you that you'll see signs of frost damage. The second ones are the aeoniums, the thin-leafed aeoniums, especially the yellow variegated one seems to be more tender to frost. The kiwi aeonium in particular, they just do not hold up as well. The yellow variegation for some reason creates, I think, a weaker cell structure for some reason. It's just my guess. It's just a wild guess. It's not based on science. Just wanted to let you know. Okay, and then also potted plants are more susceptible to damage than landscape plants. So if you put them in the landscape and they've been there for several months, your chances of having them survive are much greater than keeping them in a pot. Unless you protect the pot by putting it under the eave of your building or on your south side of your building where it radiates heat, that can help them significantly. These are some good winter survivors here. The darker aeoniums right here, they do pretty well. This fuzzy Echeveria pulvinata, they seem to do fine through winter, whereas the other Echeverias don't. And I think it's the fuzzy nature of the leaves that protects it from the cold a little better. Here's another dark aeonium. This one is a velour, I think. And this is a Opuntia cactus, a variegated one, and they seem to have some resistance to it. I think because they come from the high desert. High deserts are colder than other deserts that are not high in altitude. And this kalanchoe pumila over here, this little with the pink flower, that is a really tough plant. You wouldn't think so from the nature of looking at it, but it holds up really well in the winter, and it's flowering right now beautifully. So let me get moving. So heat and sun loving, both. These are the ones that love to get warm. The cactus I mentioned before, the euphorbia sticks on fire. The opuntia, as I said before, even though they're cactus and euphorbias, I'm still mentioning them here. These are a variety of agaves, and they love the heat. So put them in your warmest spot if you can. And this Portulacaria afra is also called elephant food, and it seems to like the heat. It's from Africa as well. The green-leafed one can handle more sun than the variegated one, which I'll show you in the next slide, or in another subsequent slide. This is the Oscularia deltoides I told you about. It spreads like 4 feet in the landscape. It takes over, but give it enough room and it's gorgeous when it blooms, and the whole thing can be pink in color. And it's really gorgeous. The only downside of this plant is that it occasionally just dies for no reason. So instead of trying to clip away all the dead parts and leave the green parts, I just usually end up taking the whole plant out and putting a new plant in. And then in a year or so, it'll look beautiful again. It's a fast grower. This Crassula silver dollar jade is pretty too. I don't usually plant much of it because it doesn't hold up that well here in my garden. The Aloe striata, it prefers some shade in hot climates, but on the coast you give it full sun and it's fine. It loves it here. Heat and cold tolerant agaves. So these, as I said, the stiffer the leaf, the more cold tolerant they are, and the more heat tolerant they are. So the only downside of all of these is this one, this agave perii retrochoke, is a thick leaf, so it tends to rot more than the others. This is the thickest leaf, so you have to give it the best drainage. Do not up pot in the winter, or it may just rot on you. This one is very sensitive to rot, this quadricolor, and so I lost a few of these in pots, and one started to rot in the ground. I just took it out with a shovel and set it on top of the soil just to bear its roots. And it seems to be recovering because it didn't die from the center. It was dying around the edges first. So I think it'll recover okay. So most succulents need 4 to 6 hours of sun per day for photosynthesis and growth to take place. There are some exceptions to that. And I have a whole shade section under shade cloth where it can survive with indirect light, like through a window, but not directly shining on it. But most need sun to grow. And the ones that can grow more in the shade, they tend to be a lot greener because the greener indicates more chlorophyll and more photosynthesis that can take place. It's like jungle plants tend to be very green, so they can absorb as much sun as they can through their chlorophyll in their leaves. Indirect or morning sun is best if you live in a hotter climate. Variegated yellow leaves prefer less sun. They tend to sunburn more easily. More sun usually improves colors too. So just keep that in mind. If you've got a green aeonium that is supposed to be red tipped or turn red, and you put it in the shade, it will definitely stay green. Or you put it in the sun, it'll start turning redder on you. This is an Echeveria elegans, and it turns pink grown in full sun. Here's an Echeveria elegans, the same plant grown underneath another plant. It got buried underneath another plant. And it's so to have these long stem regions here between the leaves until it reached the sun, and then it started looking like a real plant again. So this is what it does to save energy. It stretches, reaching for the sun, and when it reaches the sun, it starts growing normally again. So you can usually tell if your plant is needing more sun from how elongated it is between the stem regions. Now keep in mind that the north side of your house is going to be much shadier in the winter because winter solstice is very low in the sky, right? Way down here. So there's a longer shadow in the winter versus summer solstice is actually over the edge of this plane. It actually exceeds 90 degrees. Yeah, I think that's what I should say. It goes over the plane of your house. So actually the north side of your house can be sunnier, much sunnier in the summertime. Keep that in mind when you're choosing a location for your plants. Here's some examples of sunburn. Remember when I said this, yellower the variegation, the more sensitive they are to sunburn. So these outer leaves got sunburned here. And over here, this kiwi aeonium really got sunburned. It doesn't happen very often here in Half Moon Bay, but when I bring a plant in from a nursery that has shade cloth over that greenhouse, like this Swartkop aeonium right here, you rarely ever see sunburn in a Swartkop because of the dark leaves. But if it's grown in a greenhouse with shade cloth and I put it out in the sun here, this can happen. So, you know, you may have to acclimate your plants if you're bringing them in from a greenhouse to gradually increase the sunlight until they can tolerate it better. These are my part sun favorites, 4 to 6 hours of sun. These can do well with just 4 to 6 hours. Over 6 hours is considered full sun. That's like a half a day in the summertime. So it's not considered all day sun. It's just half a day in the summer. So part sun is between 4 to 6 hours and full sun is 6+ hours. So keep that in mind when you're looking at plant labels and it tells you that it needs full sun. That's at least half a day of sun during its growing season. And this Echeveria Conte is just a gorgeous plant. It's a little bit fragile. It doesn't hold up well in the winter here, but it is beautiful. And I try to get it whenever I can, and they're not always available. These, of course, these aeoniums I have year round here, and they love it here. This agave attenuata ray of light can do well in part sun because of the yellow variegation in the leaves. This kiwi aeonium as well does well in part sun. And here's another Portulacaria afra. This is a very variegated one. It's yellower in color, so it likes the heat, but it doesn't like as much sun if you're in a hotter climate. And that's the elephant food one I referred to, the green variety before. Full sun favorites. Okay, this is the end of my demonstration garden behind my building. It doesn't look like this now because after last winter, I lost this agave to runoff from my concrete side patio here. All the water drained right here to my agave. And so I lost that agave due to rot. And then this one succumbed to rot as well on the other side, just because this end got wetter from the runoff from my patio. And these Echeverias also did not fare well. And of course, the quadricolor, that one just does not like it in that spot during the winter months. Now it's drying out, I could put it there and it would be fine. So these are some of the favorite ones I use in landscapes that really show up in the landscape as well. This is that Kalanchoe pumila that's tough as nails for a Kalanchoe, and it blooms with that pretty pink flower. It's looking gorgeous right now. I have it planted all around my spiral aloe right now. It looks really stunning. All right, air. Proper drainage is key to success here. So if you plan to plant something in a low-lying area that collects water, don't put succulents there. Put some other plants, other drought-tolerant plants there. They would like it much better. But succulents just don't want their feet wet for that long a period of time. Let's see, I'm getting, the sun is setting here and it's really doing damage to my, well, you don't need to see me anyway, you just need to see the presentation. Okay, so choose higher versus lower elevations. Create mounds with rocks if you can. That also adds dimension and adds a lot of interest to it. And rocks don't need water, so add some boulders in there and create some mounds. Avoid downspouts and sump pump outlets. Here in this garden right here, this is a drain pipe that I added to the downspout to divert the water to the driveway because it was going onto the succulent bed in the far distance there. It was draining there. So I diverted the water over to the driveway to let this succulent bed keep drier in the winter. This is a raised mound here that keeps this pretty well aerated and above ground. And this happens to be an ocean colony in Half Moon Bay, which is notorious for the worst clay soil on the coast. Slimy, smeary clay. I mean, it's so bad. You really have to amend that soil. Then that's probably the only soil on the coast you really have to amend. The others you can top dress and be fine. This is a raised area in front of this Howard Street garden, which I'll show you again, but it gets a lot of attention there on Howard Street, Howard Avenue in Burlingame, I should say. All right, air and nutrients. So soil, let's talk a little bit about soil, the key to your success. All right. The carbon cycle. Okay, I'm not going to elaborate on this and go into any scientific detail because no one wants to hear that. Anyway, I just want to say that we need to reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. And to do that, we need to retain more carbon in the earth. And there are ways we as gardeners can do that. Just by no tilling, don't till your soil. Try to grow cover crops if you're doing vegetables, for instance, in between crops, do cover crops. Keep roots in the soil at all times if you can. If not, always keep a layer of organic matter on top of the soil to feed that soil life. Those soil microbes need feeding, and I'll tell you more about that in the next slide. So always keep your soil covered with plants or dead organic material, mulch or compost or leaves. Don't blow away your leaves. Leave your leaves. That's our mantra. That's the Master Gardener mantra. Leave your leaves. They're great for the soil health. And nature does not, in nature, you rarely see bare soil except if you're in a desert. Everywhere you go, nature tends to leave dead organic matter on top, like leaves or dead branches, or roots in the ground. So you rarely ever see dead soil. So always apply some kind of mulch to your garden. And with succulents, just a tiny bit is all you need. But with other drought-tolerant perennials, 2 to 4 inches of mulch is ideal to keep on the surface all the time. And bare soil is just dirt. It's not really soil, in my opinion. And then I recommend that everyone watch Kiss the Ground. It's a documentary. I think it's still on Netflix if you look for it. And we even have some locals from Half Moon Bay who, oh, that sun is killing me. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to move my location here. Just 1 minute. The sun is setting and it's in my eyes. Hold on a second. Ah. Oh, the best laid plans, right? I never have sat in this chair before to do it. I usually am in my office, but I said, oh, I'm going to be comfortable today. So here I am, comfortable with the sun in my eyes. All right, let's move on. Soil food web and living soil. So I alluded to this before. There are lots of microbes in the soil, bacteria and fungi, and you need to feed those microbes in order to have healthy plants, because they are what feeds your plants the nutrients they need when the plant roots call for it. And there's an exchange of nutrients between the plant roots and these microbes. Microbes feed it nutrients and the plants give it sugars, and that allows them to grow. So it's a symbiotic relationship going on in the earth, just like in your gut. As I stated in my bio, I was a registered dietitian. I still am a registered dietitian. I haven't practiced in 40 years, but the gut microbes are so important to your overall health. You have like 2 pounds of gut microbes in your gut, and they keep you healthy. They're not bad. Most of them are beneficial. So you want to feed your gut microbes fiber, and you want to feed your soil microbes organic matter, whether it be roots or dead organic material on the surface of the soil, and they will make your plants a lot happier and healthier. And at the same time, it will sequester carbon in the soil, keep the carbon in the soil instead of off-gassing it into the atmosphere. So that's how we as gardeners can hold more carbon in the soil and reduce our greenhouse gases. And keep in mind, there are far more beneficial microbes than pathogenic ones. They're majority of them are beneficial, so don't shy away from them. Don't shy away from dirt on your hands. My hands I've got dirt under my fingernails like all the time. It doesn't bother me at all. I try to scrub it out, but it's always there. And there's more microbes in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on earth, believe it or not. That's amazing, isn't it? And these little worms here are a sign of health in your soil. They're not a sign of ooey gooey icky mess. I've had some people say, well, what do you do with those worms when you find them? How do you get rid of them? And I go, no, you want the worms. It's the snails I can do without. when I see a snail, I am crushing it right away because they're not native to this California at all. They're from France, I believe. So I crush as many snails as I can. I don't feel bad about it at all. But earthworms, I will save every single earthworm I find and put it back in the soil if it was in a pot, for instance. So do your part. Okay. Ideal soil. What is ideal soil? 50% of soil should be pore space, open air pore space, and that should be occupied by half air and half water. And then as the water dries out, then it creates more air space, obviously. Then that's when you need to rewater, to add more water to give you some hydration for your plants. Soil in the ground is composed of 45% mineral content. That's clay, silt, and sand. You do not have this in potting mix. Potting mix is all organic matter. It will decompose over time. Do not plant things. Do not add potting mix to your soil and plant things in it because it will shrink eventually as it decomposes and absorbed by the roots, consumed by the roots. So you can add a little bit of that as a top dressing, like an amendment mix or compost mix, which is all organic. That's great for the top of the soil because that mimics nature. But you don't want to add potting mix in general to the soil. You want to reserve the potting mix for pots. So ideally, you want 20% clay because it retains water and nutrients. 40% silt is ideal and 40% sand. If it's too sandy, it's not really necessarily great because it tends to get hard and compact with too much sand, and it sheds water and nutrients. So this is the ideal composition right here. You may not have that, but you can improve any type of soil with the addition of compost. And that's that little 5% of organic matter in your soil. The black part in your soil, if you have black soil, you've got a lot of this organic matter already in your soil, and you're very lucky. Here in downtown Half Moon Bay, we have black soil. We can grow most anything in the soil, fortunately. So you can always improve any type of soil. Whether you have too much clay or too much sand, you can improve it by adding organic matter or compost or mulch. And that will help, the soil microbes help bring in those nematodes and those worms and create aeration in your soil. And the organic matter acts as kind of a glue sticky substance too, and that holds water as well. So it's a substitute for clay if it needs to be. So just keep that in mind. Here's some soil samples from my backyard when I first moved back to Half Moon Bay in 2015. I had a parking lot, and underneath the parking lot was this soil right here. It's hard as a rock, but the same soil in an area that was mulched for many years looked like this. I want you to notice the open porosity of that soil, the structure of that soil. Water is not going to penetrate this at all, or roots. It's going to have a hard time getting roots through this. But this soil is open, aerated, and blacker in nature too, because of all the mulch that had been applied for all those years. So mulch, 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 and leave your leaves, okay? Now, this is the kind of soil you find in Ocean Colony in Half Moon Bay, the smeary kind of clay that we as kids used to make ashtrays out of. Now they don't make ashtrays. No one smokes anymore. You make other things out of this clay. But this needs some kind of amending to make it more porous, because you're not going to just do it with amending the top of the soil with some compost or mulch. For heavy clay soil, you're going to have to till in 3 to 4 inches of this mixture, like 1/3 fine redwood or wood shavings, 1/3 quality compost, or I use aged horse manure. Be sure it's aged. And then 1/3 pumice or coarse sand. I prefer to use pumice in pots. In the ground, you could use a coarse sand. But this is what you have to do if you have rock solid, smeary, yellow or orange clay like this. Otherwise, you can do the top dressing and that I'm going to discuss next. So organic versus synthetic. A lot of people ask me, well, what kind of fertilizer do you use? Your plants are growing so huge. And I go, well, it's not really truly fertilizer. I'm just feeding the soil microbes what they like. And I tend to get a blend of aged horse manure and shavings from a local vendor here. And I put that on the top of my succulent beds twice a year. And that's all I need to do for the in-ground beds. And they're perfectly happy. So it's about 1 inch. It's not too thick, because if you put too much of mulch or compost on top, it can create too much moisture retention for succulents during the winter months. And you don't want to retain too much moisture. So I usually use about 1 inch for succulents. If it was an other drought tolerant plant, I would use 2 to 4 inches of mulch, more than likely. And synthetic fertilizer feeds the plants directly and usually only contains like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, whereas whole organic fertilizers contain trace minerals and micronutrients. So that's another advantage of doing it naturally too. You know, when you feed them compost, you're not only feeding them the microbes what they like, but it also brings in some nutrients along with it. And then this can be deceiving, but growth does not necessarily equal health. You know, if I use the analogy, you feed a child fast food all their lives, will they grow? Yes, they will grow. They will grow too much. Will they be healthy? Probably not. Okay, so you want to feed your plants what they normally would consume in nature, not provide an overabundance of synthetic fertilizer that might make them grow like they're plants on steroids, for instance. Okay. And then we master gardeners, another mantra of ours is feed your soil, not your plants. Apply a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of quality compost or soil amendment or aged horse manure with shavings, kind of a good mixture that I use because it's handy, it's local. I apply it twice a year, early fall and spring, to the soil surface. But be careful, because horse manure can contain pathogenic bacteria and weed seeds if not properly composted. You know, steer manure won't have weed seeds in it because of the rumination process that the steer goes through in their stomach. It kills all the weed seeds, but horse manure will have weed seeds. So if it's not aged and heated up properly, you'll introduce weed seeds with the horse manure. And if it's not aged properly, it'll be hot and it could possibly burn your plants. You can tell by the smell of it if it's aged or not. I mean, it should smell good. If it smells yucky, it's probably not something you want to put on your plants yet. You can also apply fish emulsion, which is a natural kind of fertilizer. It's really stinky. Or compost tea is great if you can make your own. It's sometimes a little difficult because you have to aerate it. There's a whole process to making compost tea. Or there's something called moo-poo tea that you can buy online. And Deborah Lee Baldwin uses this, but I think she primarily uses it for her pots. I wouldn't recommend liquid fertilizers like this, or organic fertilizers for the garden in the landscape. I would go with your aged horse manure or a good soil amendment and apply that twice a year. So let's talk about rocks as mulch. A lot of people they'll come because I might also do many garden designs, and people say, well, can't we just put rocks on top of everything? And I say, yes, we could, but that doesn't feed your soil microbes who feed your plants, right? So, you know, it might work with desert plants like cactus and agaves, but I don't think your other plants are going to really enjoy being surrounded by rocks, especially if it's really warm in your area. They can heat up the soil too much. And also they churn into the soil unless you put weed cloth underneath them. Every time you pull a weed, you know, you're churning rocks into the soil, and it's a lot of upkeep, in my opinion. It's too much upkeep. I mean, even this is a beautiful design, by the way. And Lori Eubanks does a great job of designing gardens in Southern California. You'll probably seen her on YouTube, designed by something. Yeah, she has a whole YouTube website. And I do watch her and I get some pointers from her. But she uses rocks as mulch routinely, and I don't recommend it for the health of the plants down in Northern California. I just don't think it makes that much sense. But each to their own. You can do whatever you want at your garden. So the pros of using rocks are it's better weed suppression than wood mulches because it will compact the soil more and perhaps, block out more light. But I would use weed cloth underneath it and make sure it's heavy enough so the weed cloth doesn't come up with mold. Moles can move weed cloth easily. So I never use weed cloth in the landscape because moles are always disrupting nerd gophers and it's a mess. But maybe under a couple of inches of rock as a border. Yeah. Okay. I do that. I think it's best for desert specimen plants that don't require many nutrients. It can add a lot of nice design elements, as you saw with Laura Eubanks' design. It's very pretty. It's very fireproof, which is great for our today's world in California, right? And with our circumstances here, and putting rocks as mulch near your house, I think makes sense because it won't catch fire, whereas mulch eventually could. So maybe that's a good place to put it. It can provide a buffer zone from dogs. So if you have a garden that comes up to the sidewalk and you don't want dogs peeing on your precious, spiral aloe or whatever you've got out there, then put a little buffer zone of a border around it. And that keeps the dogs from getting into your garden too much. As I said before, the cons, it can possibly overheat roots in hot climates, and the rocks don't feed the soil life. They may limit the spreading of tapestry designs or ground cover. That's another disadvantage, because if you put rocks down and let's say you put weed cloth under it and then you plant a plant, well, it's not going to spread very well if it only has a little hole in the weed cloth. If you're preventing it from spreading, unless it's a specimen plant that doesn't spread, then I don't really recommend it. It also churns into the soil, like I told you, and then when weeding and removing other plants, it makes a mess. And it increases your soil compaction. It doesn't help aerate your soil, whereas a mulch or an amendment would really add life to your soil and help aerate the soil. Watering. So a lot of people say, oh, I don't need to water this very much, do I? And they set their timers on 5 minutes a week, or sometimes they set their drip irrigation 5 minutes every other day, which is really not the way to go. And I'll tell you why. That keeps the water right at the surface of the soil. And that's where your roots were going to stay. If you water deeply to at least 6 inches for succulents, or even deeper for non-succulents, like 12 inches for non-succulents, then the roots are going to follow that water down into the earth and become more drought tolerant because there's always more water deeper in the earth. So you want your plants to become as drought tolerant as possible, and therefore water as infrequently and as deeply as is necessary to keep those roots going downward, not staying on the surface and drying out. That will improve your drought tolerance of your garden remarkably by doing that. Mornings are always best for irrigation. Water the entire zone when you do it. So we recommend something like this. It's 1/2-inch tubing with emitters built in the tubing, usually every 12 inches. And this water, and usually doesn't look exactly like this. Usually you do one row behind some plants and then another row in front of the plants, so that you water the whole zone and not half a plant with one spaghetti tube of an irrigation line. Because a lot of people are used to seeing those little spaghetti tubes that come off the 1/2-inch lines, and they just end up on watering half the root zone of one plant, but they're not watering the entire zone. And you're not only watering the roots, you're watering the microbes as well, because without water, the microbes will die. So you want to make sure you water the zone when you water. And if you choose to hand water like I do, I get out there twice a month. It's not a big deal to hand water, but I do water deeply. And it helps wash off pests like aphids too when you hand water. And then I said, avoid that 1/4-inch drip lines. They're problematic. They oftentimes break, and then you don't know where the breakage is. And then half the garden doesn't get watered and half gets overwatered. And yeah, I'm not a fan of those. And this system right here, I won't give you maybe it's a Netafim system, but there are other systems that have 1/2-inch or 1/2-inch line like this with emitters built into the system. This happens to be Netafim. we're supposed to give like 3 different brands, and I never can remember the other ones. Maybe Rainbird has one. I'm not sure.
Rainbird and Hunter has,
Oh, there you go.
has inline
Okay, great. Rainbird.
irrigation system.
Yeah.
Rainbird and Hunter. Well,
Okay.
actually, Netafim might be a Hunter product now. Not really sure.
Oh, okay. Great to know. Yeah, you would know, the water expert. And I do recommend, like Laura Eubanks, I do recommend getting the subsurface line, because as long as it's approved to be buried under the ground, that's ideal when you can only put a thin layer of mulch on top, because otherwise that mulch usually dissipates, it gets consumed, and then you start to see the lines on top, which is not pretty. So if you use the subsurface stuff, you can go down anywhere from 3 inches to 9 inches. And Foothill College recommends burying this down 9 inches, I guess, to avoid a shovel damage maybe. But yeah, I would recommend that for succulents, going subsurface. Okay, watering with rain barrels. I got these through a rebate through Bosca. And so I got 50% reimbursed for 2 of these. And they're great. And I'm going to have to put them up now that I finished my remodel. So you won't see them if you come by, but they will soon be back in place. And we water, we use this all the time in the summer months to just do a little hand watering here and there when we up pot plants. We use use a pitcher instead of a hose. And these are great. And the rainwater has really a lot of advantages. It's 100% soft. There's no mineral content. It's slightly acidic, which most plants like. It contains nitrates. It pulls the nitrogen from the air, and that's what gives your plants life. I mean, the first rain, when you see the first rain in the spring, in the winter, everything seems to come to life. It's so beautiful. So, and it also oxygenates your plants as well, pulls out nitrogen and oxygen. So it's great to use, especially in our foggy areas, because we get a lot of runoff in the spring and summer, whereas you may not get so much on the other side of the hill. We get a lot of runoff. So if you've got foggy weather, put up a rain barrel for sure. It's worth it. Okay, signs of underwatering. These dried leaves here are a sign, shriveled leaves up here. Now, if you just have dried leaves, it's not necessarily underwatered. But if you have shriveled leaves here and dried leaves, then yes, that's a sign of underwatering. These are definitely shriveled. You can see it more obvious here. And then these air roots are a sign that the plant is desperately seeking out more water. So it's actually extending roots from its upper part above the ground to try to find more water. And then this aeonium on the right is really, it got a narrowed stem region up here, went through a little drought period up here. And that's why the head is not as big. And the stem region is narrower up here, whereas it's thicker down here. So, and then I think it had a little less light as this one than this one did too. But those are the signs of underwatering. Overwatering, well, if it flops over like this stem did in the aeonium, definitely overwatered. I think this is during our warmest time of year when these go dormant, and I kept putting more water on thinking it would help. And then I realized, oh, it's not growing. So now it's rotting on me. Don't do that. Agave rot is kind of deceptive because it starts out with black spots on the leaves, usually the lower leaves. But if it hits the center of the plant, it may not survive. This kiwi aeonium is very sensitive to being overwatered. This winter, they suffered the most from all the rains. They turned yellow and black leaves, and I kept pulling off black leaves all the time. And now I'm throwing out a lot of these right now. But the sunbursts were fine, which has a yellow as well. But this kiwi seems to be more sensitive to it, as well as that quadricolor agave that I mentioned previously. And these echeverias get mushy on occasion in the landscape if they stay too wet too long. But this year wasn't too bad in my landscape because I didn't plant them in the winter. Don't plant your summer growing plants in the winter. Plant them in the summer, guys, okay? That will help the soil structure get in place, help the aeration before the wet winter hits. And then your soil's already made porous by all the microbial activity. So try to avoid planting summer growers in the winter and vice versa, the summer if you want to have a healthier plant. Here's agave rot. These black leaves down here are all rotted away in this agave. And this is kalanchoe stem rot where it just fell apart. So first question and answer period. I may be running out of, I may not be showing my YouTube at the end, but that'll be fine. So any questions out there? You have any questions for me? I think you're going to be doing that. It's Debbie, right? I forgot your name. 'Cause it says, yeah. It
And
says
so,
Kyle. Yeah,
yeah, it says Kyle because
I know.
I'm on Bosca's.
I know.
On Bosca's Zoom. Yeah, I believe they just need to raise their hand if they want to ask live. Oh, or wait a minute, is the question and answers? I think it's a Q&A, but I don't have anything in there. So
Okay,
looks like no one has a question.
good. Okay, we keep rolling along then. Okay. All right, so landscape design. This is the next segment I'd like to talk about. This is not one of my designs. I'd like to take credit for it, but my neighbor did this and I thought it was just stunning at one time. Yeah, she created little pathways in her front yard, which really you have to have when you deal with succulent garden, because otherwise you're going to be stepping into the plants, breaking things all the time. So this was just, I think, beautifully done. And I'll show you more of this in another slide as well.
We do have one question now if you want to
Oh, okay.
a moment.
Yeah.
They want to know, how do you help a plant that is seeking water, long stem?
What?
How do you help a plant that is seeking water, and they have in parentheses long stem?
I think if it has a long stem, it could be seeking out light, perhaps. Air roots are a sign of seeking out water. That other one I showed you had a long stem because I think it was seeking out light, and then it was deprived of water during that one section of growth at the top, and so it also became smaller in the head size. But usually elongation a lot of times means that it's seeking out light. Okay. Let's keep moving on. Garden. So in this design basics, I'm going to go over garden size, what garden size is ideal for succulents. Talk about color and contrast, shapes and textures, and heights and layering, and how to use all of those design tools to help your garden come alive. This is that Howard Avenue one in Burlingame that I just love. I go there periodically, like twice a year, and I help clean it up for them. So I can take pictures basically, right? This is the Oscularia deltoides in bloom, in full bloom. So that's how beautiful it looks. That's why I like to use it if I have enough room in the garden. Okay, succulents are fragile and shouldn't be walked in, as I said. So this is my neighbors with her pathways. That's one way of breaking it up. Stairways like this. I had a disabled client who couldn't walk uphill on uneven surfaces. So this enabled her to come up here and tend to her plants on either side. That's a nice pathway to create. This one is actually, this is a view from above where she created this little garden down below and had these little stepping stones that look like feet. I thought that was a really cute idea. So she could walk around her garden and tend to it without damaging things. This is newly planted, so it hadn't filled in yet. Here, this one I had in the front of my building until I ripped it out to do my renovation. But you might think that this is too deep to get in there and do anything to and help maintain it. But I had about a foot of space behind here. So I was able to walk behind here and actually prune and clean things up from behind. So I always leave a little space. If it's more than 2.5 feet in depth or 3 feet in depth, you probably want to be able to access it from the other side, or put boulders in there so you can step on the rocks and not hurt the plants. That's another way of doing it. Here's the garden across the street from me that I planted. And this is reachable. All these plants are reachable from all sides, except right here. It's a little too deep, so I have to climb in there. But for the most part, you want to be able to reach everything, and your arm reach is about 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet if you're lucky, on your knees. And I put a little 18-inch wire fence here to protect this from the dogs. The oscularia grew out over on the sidewalk, but this little fence did keep the dogs out of my garden for the longest time until this oscularia grew in, and then the dogs didn't seem to jump in there and bother with it. I use a color wheel quite often when designing my gardens. Sometimes I want to go with the warm tones, the reds, the oranges, and yellows, and the kind of the earth tones. And sometimes I want to use cool colors or pastels. But there's no real rule in nature. You can mix the two. You can mix them together, and they're going to probably look fine. But this is what I tend to do. I also do complementary colors, which are opposite each other on the color wheel, which I'll discuss in another slide. But I'll show you some examples of doing warm gardens and cool gardens next. Here's one with similar hue and cool colors. So this is kind of a blue tone over here going on in the middle. And over here, we've got pastels in the same hue, which really, I think, look really good together, along with the different textures surrounding it. So you always want to vary the texture, not, a garden of all echeverias would be pretty boring, right? You want to vary it up with different plants around it. And then if you want to look back on these slides, you'll see what all these plants are, because everything is usually labeled here. This is my warm color end of my garden. So this is, as you can see, the greens and the yellows and the darker tones here. And then this phormium, which is no longer there. It kind of got too big for the space. I have other alternatives now I use instead of larger phormiums, but yeah, that's a really cool way of designing as well, using warm colors. Now, here's what really makes your garden pop, using complementary colors. And I do this in every garden design. I try to find some complementary colors, put them together. Sometimes nature does this for you, like this Swartkopp aeonium. When it blooms, it's bright yellow and it has this purplish dark color beneath it. And that's if you look at the color wheel, we got purple and yellow opposite each other in the color wheel. And that always lends to great contrast and a pop of color. Over here, we've got this purple and yellow as well. And that looks wonderful. And then the orange and the blue here. And then we've got the orange and the greens here. Or blue, actually the blue. Yeah, there's orange in the center. That euphorbia sticks on fire didn't last long. That was in my early stages of gardening when I tried to get it to grow in Half Moon Bay. I've since given up. I do not grow sticks on fire in downtown Half Moon Bay any longer because they just do not like our climate. They grow like trees in Southern California, but here, really tough one to grow unless you keep it warm and in the sun. Here's my good friend Cynthia Nation's garden. She's another master gardener, and she also teaches succulent classes. And this is her backyard. And you talk about color, huh? Wow, she's got it covered. I also try to contrast the dark colors with the lighter ones. So I tend to use this black adder phormium quite a bit if there's space. Here it's in a pot, of course, so it's confined. But in the landscape, this can get 4 by 4 easily, very quickly. So you have to give it a lot of room to grow in the landscape, but it really looks great with the yellow or aeoniums. I use this combination quite a bit. And of course, combining these aeoniums here with the contrasting brightness is also great. Looks great. And then again, I said to vary your shapes and textures. You don't plant all echeverias. You don't plant all ice plants. You try to mix it up. Try to have some height, vertical nature. Try to have some fluffiness, filler space in between. And I'm going to talk about that next, the thriller, filler, spiller concept, which you probably have heard of before. But you can also, extend that into the landscape by talking about tall, medium, and ground covers as well. This is the Ruth Brankoff garden where they've incorporated a lot of different shapes and textures in the landscape. That's pretty much a xeriscape landscape right there. I don't think they have to water that at all in the summer months. Colorful companion plants for height, because oftentimes what's lacking in succulent gardens is height. And if you do get some height, sometimes like with a giant agave, like right now I've got this humongous 10-foot agave in my backyard that's only supposed to get 6 feet. And that gives me a lot of height, but not too many people have room for a 10-foot agave in their yard. So these are other alternatives that are great for adding vertical nature and color. And this is one of my favorites right now. It's Beschoneri Yacoides Flamingo Glow, and it produces this beautiful flamingo pink flower every year. And this one I use quite a bit right now. And this Blackadder Formium, as I said before, and then a Cordyline Electric Pink. I like this one quite a bit as well, especially with the pink ice plant. I use that combination quite a bit. And some other colorful companion plants. This is from the Protea family. So both of these are from the Protea family. One is called Leucospermum Brothers or pincushion plant. This one is Leucodendron Safari Sunset. So if you want some height and color as a backdrop to your garden and you want to be able to walk in a deep bed, then adding some of these non-succulents is a great idea because you won't be walking in there and breaking things. And then these make great cut flowers, the pincushion plants as well. So they're serve two purposes. I'm going to get out of the sun one more time. Okay. As I said, the thriller, filler, spiller, I did not coin that phrase. I stole that phrase from I don't know where, but usually it's used in container gardening to give you some dimension to your pot. So you put in a thriller, usually the tall one that draws your attention to your eye, or maybe the more colorful one. And then you put some fillers that are lower in height around it. And then you put a spiller in that hangs over the pot. In the case of the landscape, you want to go from tall to short from your vantage point. So here I put a leucodendron in the background for some height and some taller aeoniums. And then I kept going lower and lower with more aeoniums here. This agave right here has gotten much bigger since then, by the way. That's another thriller, that agave. And then these lower lying succulents down here. I think these are sedums. I can't see them all clearly. But so you go from tall to short from your vantage point, and then you can see everything. If you go hodgepodge, like tall, short, tall, short, tall, short, well, you can't really see everything, and your eyes get confused, and it kind of bothers my brain a little bit to go into a garden where everything is tall, short, everywhere you look. So here's some examples of thrillers. This is my neighbor's garden. She used this art piece, this metal artwork here as one of the thrillers. This aloe Hercules tree is a thriller. This agave here is also a thriller. And this another agave over here. So she's got thrillers in the 3 garden beds, more than one, in fact. And then she's got a lot of fillers and some even lower lying ones here. And in this garden, I used a pot in the center of this circular garden. So this was the focal piece, and it had a pathway around it. So the taller part was in the center instead of the background. A lot of times I use aeoniums as fillers and echeverias as fillers because they're medium height. And this Kalanchoe pumila down here is more of like a spiller because it's the lowest lying one. It's the lower growing one. And here's those aeoniums again. Spillers or ground covers. There's Echeveria elegans I use quite a bit, and it puffs out and keeps spreading. This Sedum rupestre Angelina, the dark, this one here is actually the lemon ball. I don't see the other sedum over here. Campfire, this is Crassula campfire. I like it because it's really red, but it does not fare well in wet winters. It looks kind of crappy after the winter is over, but it'll recover. It gets a little black spotty in the winter, but I love it. And this one is also a keeper it self-propagates, you know, it'll by seed, by leaf, whatever, it'll just keep propagating by itself. There's an ugly period of that too, but I usually plant it anyway in a lot of landscapes. And there's Kalanchoe Pamela with the pink flowers is one of my favorites as well. And poppers, always try to find something that pops in the gardens, draws your eye. So I use the sunburst aeonium quite often, Echeveria elegans, that's on my logo actually, the red pagoda and the campfire. Trying to get through this quickly because we're getting near the end of the time slot. So succulents for large spaces, this torch aloe is great for taking up a large amount of space. A large agave, like the one I have in my backyard, which I may show you a picture of in one next slide, it can take up 6 to 10 feet if you really want to fill a huge space. And I'll let you go through this on your own. And this also is great. This Calandrinia, spectabilis, or rock purslane, I use it in all my garden plants because it grows like 5 feet wide, 4 to 5 feet wide, and it almost blooms year round here on the coast. It can get a little stemmy after a couple of years, so I'll cut it back to a little ball of stems, but it keeps on going. And I have a demonstration garden in the back. If you ever want to come by and take a look, it's just behind the building. So come on by and check it out. And then I have this garden across the street for me that I use as a demonstration garden. And of course, the one in front, and I'll soon have one in the front of my remodeled building to come and check out. And this is in front of the nursery here. So you can always come by and take a look at these sample gardens. And that's it. I'm going to cover my favorites quickly. This Calandrinia.
You do have one question. They said, I have a question about the aninium. I'm going to mess this name up. Succulent.
Yeah, aeonium.
Aeonium, thank you. They're just sad looking and kind of small size now. Leaves aren't firm. I repotted recently a week ago, hoping it to be happy again. It will rely help if something to suggest to help my plant. Sorry. It will really help you. Yeah, if you have a suggestion.
It may have started to rot on her, but letting it dry out between waterings, that's the only thing I can think of that might affect an aeonium. Aeoniums have done well this winter, except for excessive water, but could be sunlight. It could be a number of factors. Again, you know, without seeing it, it's really hard for me to tell. I'm sorry. But you know, sometimes people bring me a plant and or show a picture to me at the nursery and say, hey, would you know what's wrong with my plant? And a lot of times I can tell them. So if you bring a picture on your phone, maybe I can help you. How's that? Okay, so this Calandrinia, it's great, as I said. The only thing is sometimes one will just die for no reason, but it doesn't happen all that often. I do cut it back when it starts to look bad, and sometimes oftentimes it'll regrow. It's pretty hardy. Gophers do like it, I think, because the stems lay on top of the soil and they'll come up and they'll eat the stems. So that's one of the other ones besides the agave. This one, the gophers tend to like a little bit. Here's the spiral aloe. I'm just going to keep zooming along because we're running out of time. Some agave favorites. I'll just let you look at this. This one I love, this Queen Victoria, although I've never seen a full-grown one in Half Moon Bay because I think it just grows so super slow here in Half Moon Bay. It needs warmer weather than most others. Echeveria favorites, the Conte, the Afterglow, the Elegans. The aeoniums I've talked about already. Ground cover favorites. I'll let you go back and review all of these. I've already mentioned all of these at one point. Pollinators. And again, there are some that really attract bees and hummingbirds, especially aloes. The hummingbirds love aloe flowers. The bees love sedum, autumn joy, and aeoniums, and the Calandrinia, the rock purslane, they love that. So you can take a look at this list later and discover more. Okay, any other questions before I move on to maintenance? Okay. Are we good?
We are good.
We are good.
Okay, all right, let me get through this here then. All right, pests, plant maintenance and pests. I'm just gonna talk briefly. This is not gonna be really lengthy in subject matter. Removal of lower dead leaves, that's a normal growing process for these aeoniums, especially in the summer months. You're gonna see more dead leaves than you do in the winter. That's just normal because they're dormant in the summer. Just pull off the leaves, kind of throw them on the ground, you know, leave your leaves if you can. If they don't look too ugly, leave your leaves on the ground and the plants will like it. You might need to, for this agave, this is a growing process, these lower leaves die off, and if they don't pull off easily, you can actually take a little pruning saw and cut them off if you want. So we'll discuss all the other aspects here of plant maintenance as we go forward. This is the removal of the dead leaves, as I said. Transplanting is great. It's easy with succulents because they're shallow rooted, most of them. So you can just take a shovel up, pop them out of the ground and divide them if they're dividable. Like this one is, this aloe here is very easy to divide. This one's very easy to transplant. Just pop them out and move them around where you need them. And dividing and depupping, you know, the agave attenuatas grow pups like this along their stems. So periodically I twist those off. And if there's no roots, then you start them as a cutting. That's the very end of the presentation, which I won't have time for, but you can always watch my YouTube on propagation by going to the link from the slides, or you can find the link on my website as well. And then you can watch the propagation video on how to propagate from stem cuttings or leaf cuttings. Deadheading and pruning. Yeah, easily done. When the aeoniums die, when the flower fades like this, this stem part will die back. So I just cut it at an appropriate point. And usually I get regrowth from underneath it. So it always looks good most of the time. You're not going to have a real big bare spot when you cut back an aeonium stem. Echeverias, when the hummingbirds no longer like them, I just cut them off, no big deal. And prune, you can prune the oscularia if it gets out of control. And then you've got cuttings. And calandrini, as I said, sometimes it gets so stemmy that I'll cut it back to a little ball of stems like this, and it will regrow normally and look fine. Now, the big three in terms of pests: snails, which I've already told you I despise. The aphids are not that much of a problem in my garden. In potted plants, they're more of an issue, but they're more resilient to aphids when they're in the ground and healthy, and they're healthy. When the flower starts to die, you might see more aphids than before that, but normally aphids are not a big deal in my garden, just in pots occasionally. This little cabbage moth larva is a little stinker, and I'll describe that further. Also, gopher damage, I said, was rare, but in some cases, like this huge agave, one gopher took this huge, I mean, this was 4 feet wide, took out this agave by eating the center core of it. See, this is dirt right here in the middle of this agave. So the gopher went right straight up the juicy core and ate out the core, and that's what killed the entire plant. And it could take out a huge agave, just one gopher. If it ate the roots, the plant would regenerate fine and regrow and be fine. But if it hits the core of that plant, it's going to die, unfortunately. Deer is rare for succulent. Deer damage is rare, but occasionally when they're really, really hungry, they'll eat it like an artichoke leaf, unfortunately. Normally, they won't touch these blue flame agaves, but it happens on occasion. The snails, my arch nemesis. There's lots of things you can do. You can go out at night with your headgear on, your headlamp on, and pick them off, squish them. Or you know what a lot of people do is feed them to their chickens. Chickens love them. Put them in a bucket with a lid and give them to a neighbor who has chickens. They'll love you for it. Then you don't have to kill them. And then, you know, try to reduce the amount of mulch that you have, because sometimes they hide in the mulch. They love the senecio for some reason. That's like bait for them. You can trap them. You can try the pie tin of beer thing, but I've never been successful with that. Yeah. The best thing to do is either to sprinkle some iron phosphate bait like Sluggo out there, or or there's other iron phosphate baits, but I just can't think of the name of them right now. But those are safe for the environment and pets and around children. So that I use Sluggo a lot, or I hand pick them off. But there's more information on the UC website, the IPM UCNR website. So if you ever have a plant pest question, just Google IPM.UCANR and the name of the pest, and it will bring up all the pest notes from the UC system, and it'll give you lots more advice. And here's more slug. You can always tell when you've got a snail because they eat like a really rounded hole in your leaf like this. They chew off the end of the leaf, so that's definitely a snail. Here, it's not so evident. They just ate the surface of this agave where it's most tender. They won't go through the agave leaf because it's very fibrous. So this was hard to detect, but that's what I figured out happened to that one. Aphids, again, they're not a huge problem, but you can wash them off with water. Usually I just take the flowers off and toss the flowers because they're hard to wash off flowers. Just keep your plants as healthy as possible. They'll be more resilient. You can try lady beetles, but you have to put them out a certain time of year at night. And there's more information on the IPM website. And leaf rolling larvae, if you see a lot of little webbing going on, it's apical tip. You probably have this cabbage moth laying eggs on your plants and then producing this little larva, and that's what does the damage, that little green larva right there. You can try a bacterial microbial insecticide called BT that's not harmful to anything. You can use that, or I just go around looking for them and picking them off. That's usually what I end up doing. And then here's another one. Here's a hidden one in this dried leaf here, or a lot of times they're hidden in a rolled leaf. So if you see a leaf that's stuck together, sometimes you'll see the little green larva hiding in the rolled leaf. That's why it's called a leaf rolling larva, obviously. And the webs is an indication that you've got them there. Okay, well, we're not going to do the propagation one. We're going to skip that. No, we're not going to do that. Okay. If you have more questions, please go to our website. We have office hours at these locations, Half Moon Bay and San Francisco, and the Veterans Memorial Center in Redwood City. And you can even ask us a question online. You can bring in your plant during our hours of operation if you want to. You can email it. You can call. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us. So if I haven't given you an answer to your questions, you can always email the Master Gardeners and they will get back to you within a short period of time. All right. There's my references, which I'll let you read later on. And thank you very much for hosting. We appreciate it, Bosca. You've been a great supporter of the Master Gardeners. And any other questions?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, good. I usually try to answer all the questions. I've done this about a dozen times probably. So every time I get questions, I incorporate a slide to answer that question. So hopefully I've answered everybody's question, and you can go out and get started and plant that garden. Now that the rains are falling off a little bit, it's probably a great time to get out there in the garden and plant. Grow, grow, grow. All right.
We just have a thank you. And other than that, we're good to go. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.
I very appreciate you all attending tonight.
Yeah. See you around. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.